Sometimes life shifts in a single breath. A young woman collapses beneath a midnight rain, thinking fear and solitude are all she has left. Yet, in that fragile instant, a door opens onto a world she has never known, where love and danger walk side by side, where a threadbare trust becomes the only tether to life. This isn't just a story about rain. It's about how the human heart finds light even in the deepest dark. The fluorescent lights of the New Haven Town Library hissed like a swarm of metallic insects, their cold glow spilling over the returns desk, where I had been standing for 4 straight hours, sorting the day's new arrivals. Outside, the tall windows were fogged with autumn breath. October's darkness pressed against the glass as if it wanted in. The wind rattled the old wooden frames like a tired skeleton. In that hush, even my own breathing sounded loud, mingling with the familiar scent of old paper. I was 24, well used to nights like this, finding a quiet peace in empty corridors where books waited for tomorrow's readers like patient birds on a branch. My name is Clara Jensen, and books have been my refuge since I was a child. When my father left at 12, leaving behind unpaid bills and broken promises, I discovered that fictional worlds are far sturdier than real ones. 2 years ago, cancer took my mother, dragging our tiny household into debt despite the insurance. That was when I learned stories could hold you up, when human bonds prove fragile and finite. On Tuesday nights, the library closed at 9, and I had the keys to finish the inventory. The extra pay would just about cover this month's rent on my 1-bedroom flat, at the cost of walking home alone through streets that turned more dangerous after dark. The bus route in my neighborhood ended early. Another victim of budget cuts felt most by workers, not by policymakers in warm suburban offices. I was shelving the last of the romance novels when my phone vibrated Megan's name, lighting up the screen. My oldest friend, the one who'd walked beside me through every upheaval since high school. "Hey, Em, what's up?" I asked with the warmth of 100 familiar calls. Her voice trembled. "Clara, thank God you picked up. My mom, she's had an accident. They don't think she'll make it through the night." The overhead light flickered. My blood drained to my feet. Megan's mother had been a second mother to me. Doctor visits, college forums, cheering my tiny wins as my family splintered. What happened? How bad is it? Highway crash. Drunk driver ran a red light, hit her head on. They had to cut her out with the jaws of life. Internal bleeding, possible brain trauma. Megan's words broke into fragments. "Clara, I can't do this alone. Can you come?" I was already grabbing my bag coat, the keys jangling in my hand, calculating travel time. "Of course, I'll catch the next bus and be there." "But the buses stop at 10, she cried. The 47. My only link to the hospital ended at 10:15. It was already 9:40. A taxi would be $60 I didn't have. Ride shares surged after 10. But Megan needed me. Some duties are larger than money. "Don't worry, I'll figure it out. I'll be there within an hour," I promised, hanging up before she could protest. I locked the front door, checked the security system, just as old Frank had taught me. The street outside was nearly empty, only a handful of stragglers heading toward the elevated train 3 blocks over. October wind smelled of wet leaves and concrete. Streetlights spilled pools of amber between slabs of threatening dark. Even the sky seemed to conspire against me as drizzle thickened into rain. My apartment lay in the opposite direction of the hospital. No chance to grab cash. I walked toward downtown, hoping for a bus or some other miracle before Megan's mother slipped further away. Each step took me farther from the known into a place where a young woman alone at night can more easily become a statistic than a person. Shops shuttered, steel grates rolled down. Passers-by avoided eye contact. City habit. My low simmer of anxiety began to rise. 3 blocks from the bus stop, I saw them. 2 men matching my pace at a distance. I slowed. They slowed. I crossed the street. So did they. My mother had told me to trust my instincts about safety, and every internal alarm was blaring. My phone buzzed again. "Megan," I answered. Quick in my stride, praying the shadow behind me was coincidence. "Clara, where are you?" "Mom's critical, the doctors want to speak to family." "I'm heading to the bus stop, but I think someone's following me." My voice dropped as I glanced back. The men had closed the gap. Something metallic glinted in one's hand. Will Clara get somewhere safe now? Don't come if it's dangerous. But I couldn't. Megan's mother was balanced on the edge of life, and I was the only one left to stand beside her daughter. Old wounds of abandonment refused to let me become another person who didn't show up. Irony, the determination to be reliable could get me killed before I helped anyone. Footsteps behind me quickened heavier on the wet pavement. My chest tightened, that familiar herald of panic attacks since Mom's death. Breathing became a conscious act. The world narrowed peripheral vision, blurring my nervous system, priming for fight or flight with nowhere to go. My fingers fumbled for my keys, wedged between knuckles like a makeshift weapon, while trying to dial 911. Rain-slicked phone slipped from my hand, clattering as the men began to run. Everything collapsed. A fist seemed to squeeze my lungs. Streetlights stretched into white gold streaks. My knees hit the soaked pavement. I opened my mouth for air, thick as water. Panic unfurled, rendering me helpless as danger closed in. Car doors slammed. Voices argued. Silence. When consciousness flickered back, strong arms were lifting me, carrying me toward a car parked at the curb. Through the haze, I glimpsed my rescuer, black hair, an expensive suit, eyes like winter storm clouds. "Where am I?" I whispered as he placed me in the passenger seat of a sleek sedan. His voice was deep, controlled, reshaping the air itself. "You're safe now. Don't fight me. You nearly died out there." The car moved, leaving the two men stranded under the streetlight, confused and defeated. Through the rear window, they shrank away. Whatever had just happened, it wasn't simply a random rescue from street crime. As we glided through the late-night city, I studied the stranger by the glow of the dashboard, a face both elegant and dangerous, cheekbones, like cut stone jaw carved from intent. His hand on the wheel bore expensive rings. Everything about him radiated someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Thank you," I said, though the words felt far too small for what had just happened. He glanced at me, storm-gray eyes stripping away my layers of disguise. "Thank me when you understand what I've really saved you from." What did he mean? The thought flickered as my consciousness ebbed. I woke to sunlight pouring through a window, fit for an architecture magazine. Not the cramped flat I called home. The bed beneath me was like a cloud sheets probably worth more than a month's rent mattress, contouring every inch of me with precise luxury. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I was still dreaming or had fallen into another stranger reality. The room's opulence belonged to another stratosphere. Honey-bright wooden floors, original paintings on walls painted by a professional's hand, everything deliberate, restrained, expensive. Beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows stretched a skyline and the blue sweep of Connecticut's lake, a sign of the city's most exclusive neighborhood. Memory returned in shards, collapsing on the pavement arms, lifting me a voice promising safety. My rescuer still a mystery, wrapped in storm-gray eyes and a tailored suit. Where was I? And why had a stranger brought me here instead of to a hospital? The door opened with a breath-soft sound. A man in his 50s wearing medical scrubs entered, followed by the mysterious stranger, now even more commanding in daylight. Sleep had not diminished his presence. If anything, it had made him larger, more dangerous at ease in a space that rendered me small and vulnerable. "Ms. Jensen," the doctor said, eyes flicking over a tablet as he approached. "I'm Dr. Riley. How are you feeling this morning?" The casual use of my surname sent a chill down my spine. I hadn't told anyone my name, and yet they knew, as though this was not rescue at all, but something prepared. "How do you know who I am?" The question escaped like the last thread of air left in my lungs as the doctor slipped from the room at the stranger's silent signal. A small nod from him, so slight it could have been a breath. Yet it was enough to show that giving orders was second nature to him, requiring neither force nor explanation. Now, it was only the two of us suspended in a sunlit hush. Yet, in those storm-gray eyes, I felt as though I were pinned beneath a microscope slide, every secret magnified. He took the chair beside my bed, close enough for a whisper, but leaving just enough space for me to breathe. His voice was steady, as if reading from a file he already knew by heart. "Clara Jensen, 24, librarian at the New Haven Central Library, lives alone in a small apartment. Mother died of cancer 2 years ago. Father vanished when you were 12. Each fact landed like a cold needle. Whatever privacy I had was being peeled away without mercy. What gives you the right to investigate me?" I tried to keep my voice from shaking. His brow lifted calm as a closed door. "The same right that saved your life last night. No apology, no hedging. just the certainty of someone who treats privacy like a luxury. The men who followed you weren't petty criminals, he said, not the sort who lurk in shadows for a purse. My throat tightened. Until now, I'd believed last night was random, a city's bad luck catching up with me. But he was saying it had been planned. Ice slid down my spine. What do you mean? I whispered. Instead of answering, he drew a phone from his jacket and swiped. On the screen, blurred images of me, leaving the library, two men waiting, following patient as shadows. They were calculated, professional surveillance. Someone wanted you watched, perhaps taken. Your panic disrupted their timing, but we still don't know what they meant to do next. My hands trembled as I stared at myself, moving through each frame, surrounded by unseen eyes. It was horrifying enough to be hunted. Worse to know someone else had been recording it, studying it. I want to know who you are. Part of me feared the answer more than the not knowing. Damien Rowe, he said simply, the name landing like a business card. The kind of surname newspapers wrote in looping fonts while government files carried it in silent tabs. Not entirely legal, not entirely criminal, standing in the gray where laws don't reach. And me, a small-town librarian sitting inside that world. What happens now? I asked, surprised. My voice didn't splinter. Now you rest. Then we find out why someone wants you followed. His words weren't a suggestion, they were a verdict. Walking alone at night is dangerous enough. Becoming a target turns every step into a game of survival. I drew a deep breath, trying to cage my fear. I need to get to the hospital. My best friend's mother is in surgery. She needs me. He glanced at me as though he'd already read my thoughts. Megan? Her mother came through the operation, stable. The bill's been covered by an anonymous benefactor. Megan's been told you're safe, just not able to visit yet. His words were like hands taking the wheel of my life and steering it where he chose. Gratitude mingled with a shiver. Why are you helping me? Because letting someone die on my territory is bad form. And because those men will come back if they think last night was chance. He rose, moved to the window, his tall frame etched in morning light. A scar cut across his left eyebrow. His eyes flicked between me and the door, the sort of man who never turns his back, not even in his own house. You have a choice. His voice was low and even. Go back to your apartment, your job, your routine, and pray. Last night was just bad luck. Or accept my protection until we erase the threat. Protection means no walking alone at night. It means locks and cameras you didn't ask for but need. It means anyone aiming for you has to come through me first. Each word fell heavy between us, at once seductive and terrifying. I had never wanted to owe a powerful man anything. But death doesn't bargain. They weren't street thugs. He continued watching me. Someone with money and motive hired them. That level of surveillance is for valuable targets. Ask yourself, what about a librarian is worth that? I gave a brittle laugh. My life's a bore. The most thrilling part is calculating if I can buy both rice and coffee before payday. That makes it stranger. He said, a flicker of intrigue crossing his mouth. In 3 hours, I've learned more about you than any friend you have. Information is my trade, and you, Clara, are becoming a special case. The idea that somewhere in this mansion, people were sifting through my life made my skin prickle. Yet the alternative, closing my eyes while danger tightened its circle, was worse. I want to know what you found. The words escaped before I could decide if I was ready. Damien leaned forward, his gaze softening like a private confession. In your mother's last months, someone quietly paid for the treatments the insurance refused. Someone who couldn't bear to see her suffer for what she couldn't control. The sentence struck like a blow to my chest. What we'd thought was a miracle from insurance or some charity had been a hidden hand. Who? I whispered. He looked at me, part compassion, part challenge. Someone who couldn't stand to watch good people break for reasons beyond their reach. Tears rose. I clung to a thin hope that my life could still be normal. I insisted on returning to my apartment, gripping the illusion of control. He didn't stop me, only watched as if I were a chess player stepping into a familiar trap. You call it normal life, he said. I call it illusion. Illusion doesn't stop a bullet or a kidnapping. His car took me back to my neighborhood. From the soft leather seat, I looked out at familiar streets that suddenly seemed uglier, the shadows thicker, the corners full of threat. My building's entrance, the lock broken for half a year, was now fixed, requiring a new key. In the blue steel mailbox by the door lay a notice in bold print. The security system of the building had been upgraded and would be fully operational within 48 hours. When I stepped back into my one-room apartment, everything was exactly where I'd left it. The mug with a trace of tea still clinging to its rim, the scarf draped over the back of the chair, the notebook open at the page marked "New Arrivals." But the air was different. Something had closed quietly around me. Safer perhaps, or simply watched more closely. I couldn't tell. That not knowing crawled over my skin like a field of tiny thorns, a kind of unease unlike my familiar panic attacks. It felt like standing between two doors, one etched with protection, the other with surveillance. Not even an hour later, my phone rang. Megan's voice burst through like a light switching on in a dark room. "Clara, I don't know how to thank you. The hospital admin said an anonymous benefactor has paid everything. The surgery, the rehab." I leaned back against the wall, fingers clutching the phone cord like an anchor rope. I didn't arrange anything. I told her truthfully, though. My stomach already guessed whose hand lay behind it. "How's your mom?" "Better than expected. The doctor says with steady therapy, she can fully recover. I know you must have used your savings or borrowed. I'll pay you back, I promise." The next 20 minutes poured out like a stream of bright news gratitude so dense it made me feel like a stone sinking to the bottom. When the call ended, the weight stayed in my chest, heavy, dull, unnamed. It wasn't me who had carried Megan's mother to safety, but Damien Rowe. I had been unconscious on his white sheets. Yet Megan believed I was the bridge. 3 days drifted by in a kind of suspended time. By day I returned to the library labeling new books guiding readers toward stories that could lift them from their own lives. No one followed me in the daylight. No threatening notes appeared. No strangers lingered at the bus stop. But still, I felt watched. As though the air had gained weight, as though every beep of the barcode scanner was already recorded somewhere. Was it Damien's protection, or another pair of eyes entirely untrained? I could no longer tell the difference between safe and targeted. On Thursday evening, while I was counting coins at the circulation desk, he appeared between the shelves like a shape peeled from an expensive shadow. Silent steps, composed posture. Exactly as in his mansion, only here among books and scholarly quiet, his danger seemed sharper. "Ms. Jensen," he said softly, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced." I forced a smile. "This is a public library, meaning anyone may enter." "Not everyone," he replied, settling into the opposite chair with the ease of someone accustomed to any boardroom. "The cameras show no strangers in the last 72 hours, and your building's upgrades are working." By now, his surveillance of both my workplace and home should no longer have shocked me. Yet, it did like catching someone red-handed at dismantling the word privacy. "You watch me even at work. I'm ensuring your safety while you insist on living as if nothing happened." And from these observations, what do you conclude? My own voice surprised me sharper than usual. He leaned back regarding me. "That you believe you can step back into your old life by pretending the threat doesn't exist. It's endearing. And very naive." Heat rose to my face. Not everyone solves problems by hiding in a mansion with armed guards. "True," he said lightly, as though stating the weather. "People who refuse proper protection usually die or wish they had." He walked toward the rare books section. His fingers skimmed the leather spines like something familiar. "I want to show you something. Somewhere else. Here it's hard to talk privately." My reason raised a stop sign, but my curiosity, the engine that had brought me to librarianship to every search, began to hum. "Where? Dinner? A place they'll close for us when I book it." His smile held both promise and warning. "Trust me, but you need a proper meal first." The restaurant was hidden inside a renovated warehouse on Long Wharf, outwardly silent and signless. Yet, as Damien's car stopped, the door swung open to reveal a world of light crystal chandeliers, dripping gold honey over white linen. China fine as eggshell glasses catching the glow, like they were holding small stars. A single table waited at a window, overlooking the dark stripe of the Quinnipiac River. Private enough for two, broad enough for security to watch. "You own this place," I said, not quite a question. Several places in the city, he poured a wine with a texture like soft silk, but this one's for those who prefer discretion to noise. Dinner arrived as art disguised as food, each plate a verse in its own rhythm, the wine-lifting flavors I hadn't known existed. We spoke of the city, streets I'd walked, but never truly read its tides of people, its overlapping policies, its wealth, and want its shops opening and closing with the economy's breath. You know a lot for someone who's probably never waited for the last bus of the day, I said, before thinking. Hindi depus discuss it no per sto. His eyebrow arched amusement, softening his face. I know because it's my responsibility. Call it territory if that sounds dramatic, but it's accurate. From zoning laws to the small families trying to hold their dignity inside harsh numbers. Like mine, I murmured. Something in his eyes gentled his steel, shifting aside. Your mother fought harder than most could. Cancer demands resources not everyone has, no matter the love. I narrowed my eyes. How do you know so much? Because I made sure she had every treatment available, he said quietly, a wall-solid voice. His confession turned my life's map. My mother's last months, painful, yes, but less destitute than I'd believed. It had been a hidden hand filling the gap insurance left. Why? Because some things matter more than profit margins. He drew invisible lines on the tablecloth, as if searching for the right words. Because watching good people suffer when you can help is a betrayal of what you were taught to believe. When he looked up, there was a thin strip of vulnerability in his eyes, stranger than any guilt a man who used power to shield, not just to crush. You're not what I expected, I breathed. What did you expect? Colder, more calculated, less human. He laughed, a rare sound with no hidden blade. Kindness is a luxury in my position, but sometimes someone walks in who makes it look like a risk worth taking. The silence between us grew dense like the surface of water before rain. I felt a new danger stirring. Not the shadows on the street, but a feeling that could tilt the axis of my life. We should go, I said, though every instinct wanted to stay in this beautiful, quiet light. Yes, he replied. We stayed seated a moment longer. Two people who both knew some doors once stepped through cannot be stepped back from. The drive back to my little apartment passed in a comfortable hush. Outside, the city lights shattered into 1,000 fragments, a mosaic glittering across the sedan's windows. When we reached my building, Damien Rowe walked me to the door, and strangely his presence made the shadowed streets feel safe, as if I were moving inside an invisible cocoon of light. Thank you for tonight, I said, fingers fishing for my keys while my heart tried to linger. The evening had rearranged everything I thought I knew about the man who called himself my protector. Thank you for trusting me, and for coming, he replied. Then he stepped closer, not threatening, just near enough that a clean, understated scent drifted over me and my heartbeat stumbled. Clara, he said, my name for the first time without distance. On his tongue, it lengthened, warming my chest. Before I could name the feeling rising in me, his fingertips brushed my cheek, tracing the line of my jaw with a gentleness that pressed the world to stillness. Sleep well, he murmured, and withdrew, stopping the moment just before it crossed a line. Tomorrow, we begin finding out who wanted you watched, and why. When his car disappeared into the river of night traffic, I stood very still. Accepting Damien's protection hadn't only changed the state of my safety, it had roused possibilities I'd never allowed myself to dream. Danger, yes, but also temptation, powerful enough to swallow fear whole. Friday morning, while I was helping a graduate student track down a rare volume of poetry, a floral delivery arrived. The entire lobby brightened with its presence, a dense arrangement of near-black blooms threaded with white lilies, gorgeous, imperious, and vaguely menacing. The courier waited for my signature, his face set as if even he disliked what he carried. Tucked within the expensive flowers, a card in elegant, precise handwriting. Beauty deserves a beautiful ending. Some stories finish, whether the reader is ready or not. My hands shook. I read it 3 times, willing the words to reorder themselves into something less chilling. They didn't. The warning was sharp as a blade. Someone was watching, and they believed my life was a story whose ending they had the right to write. Mr. Tuesday. The silver-haired colleague from reference took one look at me and reached for the security phone. Don't, I said, my voice so steady it surprised me. That's not how we handle this. I pulled out my phone and dialed the emergency number Damien had given me. He answered after a single ring, as if he'd known I would call. What happened? No greeting, no preamble, only the crisis. I read the card aloud. Hearing myself say the words, I felt my voice settle, bolstered by the calm on the other end. Don't touch it and don't throw it away. Marco is on his way. Clara, are you safe right now? I scanned the familiar space, the glass doors throwing us open to the street. Too many entrances for the number of people to watch them. Stacks tall enough to hide a careful step. I don't know anymore. Stay exactly where you are. Marco will be there in 15 minutes with backup. Whoever sent the flowers made a mistake choosing such a direct approach. For the first time, I heard something new under his composure. Anger. Personal, not professional. 15 minutes later, Marco arrived with two men well-dressed, but carrying the alertness of armed guards they were trying to hide. They moved with quiet choreography, gathering the arrangement, photographing the scene, chatting softly with Tuesday about neighborhood safety. When Marco came to me, his voice was low and precise. "Mr. Rowe wants you to understand the situation has changed. This is no longer surveillance. It's a direct threat." What does that mean? It means they're willing to move from watching to acting. The word acting ran a chill along my spine, from observation to intervention. And my safety. It means you can't keep your old routine, working alone, walking home, living in an apartment without secure locks. Until we identify and remove the threat, everything changes. I wanted to argue to cling to the small independence I'd built after losing both my parents. But the bouquet on the desk made the point for him. Library knowledge and a few self-defense tricks can't stand against someone with money and motive. Where does Mr. Rowe want me to go? Your apartment is being reinforced. New locks, cameras, strengthened frames. That evening, the difference was stark. The front door now needed a key card. Cameras watched every corner. Inside my place window, sensors blinked. A motion alarm breathed in the walls. My small space had become an electronic fortress. I should have felt safe. Instead, I felt the outline of my control stark and empty. I lived in a cage woven from safeguarding, roofed but with no sky. Saturday brought no relief. Marco lingered discreetly near the library while I was on shift. Others waited in a car tucked neatly at the curb. Subtle enough not to spook patrons, obvious enough to me, I was being watched and shielded at once. At lunch, I stumbled upon Damien in the rare books room, turning the pages of an old Italian collection. Among the scent of leather and dust and quiet, his danger wore a softer edge. "Found something interesting?" I asked, sliding into the chair opposite. He looked up, finger braced in the crease. "Dante Alighieri. My parents named me for him. I doubt they imagined the irony." "What irony?" "A man who wrote about descending into hell, and then built his own private heaven." He smiled almost shyly, a self-awareness that was both appealing and unsettled. Sometimes I wonder if he came back, would he recognize the world his heirs made? Talking literature while danger circled us felt almost unreal. It opened a new window on Damien, a man who reached for meaning in poetry and philosophy, while steering deals that lived outside the clean lines of the law. "You're not what I pictured when I heard the name Rowe," I admitted. "What did you picture?" "Less educated. Obviously criminal. Someone who wouldn't care about anonymous hospital bills or menacing flowers." He put the book down and leaned forward, his gaze tightening on me. "Clara, those flowers weren't a prank. That was the shift from surveillance to psychological terror. The difference: surveillance wants information. Terror means they're willing to kidnap, torture, or stage a murder to look like an accident." His words sliced away the last of my illusions. My chest locked. This wasn't my old panic, but a sharper fear. "But I don't have money. No political connections. No secrets worth anything. I'm no one." Damien lowered his voice, even and heavy as a gavel. "You matter to me. In my world, that makes you a target." The curtain tore. I wasn't threatened for what I'd done, but for who I'd become, to him. And his enemies would use any tool to make him bleed. "I never wanted to matter to you," I said. "Neither did I," he answered, eyes reflecting the blunt truth. "But some things happen regardless of our plans." Before I could reply, Marco stepped between the stacks, his face carrying the weight of bad news. "We have to go." Marco said no preamble. "Right now?" Damien sprang up at once. The pensive aura of a man who loved poetry dissolved, leaving a blade-sharp alertness in its place. "What happened?" "The Costa family reached out," Marco said. "They want to negotiate over your girlfriend's safety." The words landed like a block of ice. "I'm not his girlfriend," I said automatically, though. The distinction suddenly felt useless in front of people who saw human ties as weapons. Marco only shrugged. "It doesn't matter what you are. It matters who they think you are, and what they believe Damien will trade to keep you safe." The name Costa, I'd seen it in news articles surrounded by hints of federal investigations and hushed phrasing. A parallel world to Damien's, not an ally, but an adversary. What terms, I asked already knowing the answer, would terrify me. The kind that treats you like a commodity, Damien said, his voice holding its rage taut as a violin string. And they're about to learn how foolish that assumption is. We left the library under Marco's shield. As the car slid through familiar streets, the bulletproof glass turned the city into a war zone. Every shadow, a potential muzzle flash. The security gates at the East Rock estate opened and shut like a vacuum-sealed lid. What now? Now we see how they've decided to price you, Damien answered, clipped and dry, and show them what I'm willing to do to keep you safe. It was meant to reassure me. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. One step more, and I'd slip out of the person I thought I was. Another wave of panic gathered, then strangely broke into foam. My mind brightened as if someone had opened a window in an airless room. If becoming important to Damien Rowe had made me a target, maybe it was time to learn what that importance could make me capable of. On Sunday evening, Megan appeared at Damien's gate, face hollow, eyes sunken, clothes crumpled as if she'd worn them for days. Security held her until I came out myself. In the living room, she cradled a mug of tea in trembling hands. I have to tell you something, she began, spent from a rehearsal of guilt that had lasted years. Something I should have told you long ago. But I was scared, I was ashamed, and I was desperate. A cold stone dropped into my stomach. Megan had seen every one of my panic attacks, had sat beside me in the hospital as my mother was dying, had cheered the tiny steps as I rebuilt my life. If she'd come today with the posture of confession, it meant the foundation of trust across my adulthood was about to crack. What is it, Em? My family owes money, a debt we could never repay. Not if we sold everything, not if we worked until we died. She stared into the bottom of her cup, as if reading an omen. It started with my dad's gambling. Then Mom's accident blew everything apart. Medical bills came, and we had nowhere left to turn. Turned to who I asked the loose wires in my head, trying to knot themselves. The Costa family. A cold spike raced down my spine. The storm wasn't coming from two directions after all. It was a single vortex, swallowing everything. How long? 3 years. Right after your mother died, while you were handling the funeral, the debts. Megan's hands shook harder. They said they were helping, that families support each other in hard times. But what they wanted was leverage. What kind of leverage? Information about your habits, your work hours, your relationships. Her voice cracked. They said it was harmless, just needed to know you were stable, safe. I heard a dry snap inside my chest. 3 years of private moments packaged and sent to people who saw lives as blackmail currency. Every talk with Megan, every hug in a hospital hallway filtered through a cost-benefit equation. You've been watching me for 3 years. The words emerged calm, while my anger built like pressure in a sealed pot. It wasn't watching. Megan, I cut in, don't choose pretty words. We've read enough books to know what language can do. I pinned her with my stare. What made them escalate from listening to threatening? Damien Rowe, she choked. When they found out you were connected to him, they rushed. They said you could give them information about his systems, his weaknesses. They didn't ask, Clara. They threatened. From my mom's treatment to our house to my brother's tuition, everything depended on our cooperation. I stood and went to the window, looking out at the dark blue Long Island Sound. Her betrayal spread like toxic smoke, clinging to every shared memory. The flowers I turned back, do they know about my panic triggers? What sets me off? Megan's eyes told me enough. They asked about your emotional reactions under pressure, about the situations that make you compromise. I saw myself not as a person, but as an entry in a report. Psychological variables, episode, frequency breaking points. Suddenly an instinct flared. Where's the recorder? What are you talking about? The recording device. Your seat choice, your phrasing coming here alone, even though you know this place is guarded. You want me to say something about Damien, don't you? Megan went white, lips trembling. Clara, you don't understand what they do to people who refuse. Give me the device. Her hands shook violently as she pulled a normal-looking phone from her bag, the screen glowing with a live recording in progress. Every word we'd spoken had been streaming straight to the people who wanted to turn my voice into evidence of cooperation. 3 years I repeated this time, without anger, only astonishment at the picture now complete. 3 years believing someone truly cared without a hidden agenda. I did care, Megan sobbed. Everything we shared was real. The rest, it was a separate compartment. I never let it touch our friendship. I laughed, a sound like metal scraping metal. You think a person can seal off one compartment called friendship, while the next one is weekly reports to criminals? That's not compartmentalizing Megan. That's becoming. She bowed her head, while I stood still, feeling neither victory nor defeat. Just a hollow space big enough to hear the wind rush through. The family I'd chosen was as rotten as the one I was born losing. And even through the hurt, I understood this was the only moment left to me. The moment to decide whether I'd be the pawn pushed across the board or the one who resets the game. Megan was led away head bowed, and I understood her betrayal was only the first stone in a landslide. If my closest friend had hidden the truth for 3 years, how many other ties in my life were nothing but thin, beautiful shells, hollow inside? Damien waited in the study behind a walnut desk, so massive it felt like a fortress wall. His face was dark rage held tightly, but leaking through the edges like heat from forged metal. How much have you told her? No prelude, only questions fired like bullets. Told what? About me, about your feelings, about the details of this house, anything that could become information for Costa. His words doused me in cold water. Memories flashed. Every talk with Megan about the safety I felt near Damien, the small details of the house, the comings and goings of staff. All of it, now bullets in the enemy's gun. I don't know. I exhaled, collapsing into a chair. I only shared, like with a friend. I never thought. Damien listened, noting things down in his mind as if he were a doctor, analyzing a patient's chart. No reproach, no tenderness. Those details, how you describe the protection, the calm, they can use them to manipulate. Your feelings become a bargaining chip. A spark of clarity flared. You knew I blurted, locking eyes with his storm gray gaze. You knew Megan was reporting to Costa all along, and you kept it from me. His silence was his answer. How long? From the night I met you on the street, his voice an arrow. We uncovered Costa's network, Megan among them. A link that looked harmless. They let her believe the pieces she passed along were family matters, harmless scraps. She was naive, but naivety can still be a threat. He stepped out from behind the desk, approaching with the caution of someone nearing a frightened animal. We needed you to act naturally to keep the facade intact. If I'd told you the data flow would have fractured and we'd have lost our chance to control it, I sprang up, retreating by instinct. So you use me too. Let me live inside a friendship that was only a stage set while you knew it was all theater. I used the situation to protect you, Damien corrected. But to me, the difference meant nothing. You let me believe I had something real when it was false. How are you any different from Megan only in your reason for lying? Steel flickered in his eyes. I kept you alive. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut like a blade. The information from Megan allowed us to stay half a step ahead of Costa to ensure they never used it against you without me knowing. But I didn't know I protested. I never agreed. My life became a piece on your chessboard. If you'd known, you'd have let your feelings lead, and feelings have killed more people than bullets. I froze. The sentence, cruel but true, slashed through my anger like a knife. A part of me still wanted to believe him. But how do you trust anyone when everyone lies, only differing in the name they give their deceit? Protection. I can't trust anyone anymore, I whispered. Not Megan, not you. No one in this world. You can trust me for one thing. Damien said, his voice rough, like fire burning in wind. I'll keep you alive. Everything else we'll negotiate later. But to live without trust is to exist without truly living. I'd spent my youth rebuilding my life on the foundation of honesty. Now, if survival meant accepting a world built from lies, what was that safety worth? I need time to think, I said, turning toward the door, my steps firmer than my mind. Time is what we don't have, Damien warned. Costa knows their network is exposed. Within hours, they'll act. His words followed me out, but for the first time since that rainy night collapse on the street, I realized I feared the people protecting me more than the ones trying to kill me. When everything around me was a lie, even safety became a kind of prison. I left Damien's protection for 5 days. Returned to my old apartment despite danger, despite warnings. But it wasn't home anymore. Only a stage where I'd played the role of trusted friend for an audience hidden in the dark. Every question Megan had asked about my hours, my work, my habits replayed now like an interrogation form. Every comforting hug during my mother's illness became a psychological report. Sleep drifted far away. In its place, a constant suspicion. The creak of a wall became a sign. A delivery man, a threat. Even the panic attacks that once drowned me felt less terrifying than this unbroken tension. On the 6th day, while arranging books to return, I found something tucked inside a medical journal, a yellowed clipping from 3 years ago. Headline: Anonymous Benefactor, funds cancer treatment program at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. In the article, my mother was mentioned as the mother of a librarian. A woman offered a trial of a new therapy, thanks to the donation. The photograph showed a giant check presented by the Roe Medical Research Fund, and in the background, a familiar face. Damien younger, but with that same commanding gaze. My hands trembled violently. Damien hadn't only saved me that rainy night. He had saved me years before when I was breaking under grief. In the days when despair felt like the only horizon, an unseen hand had been arranging small miracles. And now I realized his protection hadn't begun on a cold pavement. It had begun in the heart of someone who had already decided long ago that I was worth saving. I hovered over the emergency contact Damien had given me, my fingers suspended so long above the screen my heart grew tired, waiting for me. At last the call rang once, and he answered. "Clara, are you safe?" I found something I said, my voice calmer than my real feelings. A newspaper clipping from when my mother was in treatment. "You were there, Damien, at the hospital, directly tied to the funding." On the other end, silence, long enough for me to believe the call had fallen into a vacuum. When he spoke, it was an admission, not surprise. "Where are you?" "The library, the rare books room. The only place I still think no one has seen me. Stay there. I'm coming. This time we'll say everything. No circling, no edits for strategy. No more lies." "No more lies," he echoed, and something in the timbre of it made me believe he meant it even at a cost. 30 minutes later, he appeared between the shelves, silent as a familiar shadow. Today his usual armor of calm seemed thinner in his eyes, the weariness of someone who had held a secret too long. "Show me," he said, sitting opposite. I handed him the clipping. His face moved through a weather of emotions. Regret, sadness, then relief, as if the truth breaking open was itself a kind of release. 3 years, I whispered. "You've protected me for 3 years and never said a word." "I kept a promise to your mother," he corrected, gentle but firm. "In those last weeks when medicine had done all it could, she asked me to ensure that after she was gone, you would be safe." His words turned the shape of my memories, like twisting a kaleidoscope until the colors align in a new pattern. "You knew my mother. I met her through the hospital's charity program." His voice lowered. "She was grateful for the funding, but afraid you'd be left alone. She made me promise if anything threatened you, I'd step in myself, not through an organization. Why would she trust a stranger like you? Because she was a good judge of people, and because sometimes the most dangerous men are the ones most trustworthy when it comes to protecting the innocent." He leaned forward, eyes on mine. "She also knew you'd never accept help directly from someone like me, but you might accept a coincidence." For the first time, a lie felt less like a cold cover, and more like a blanket someone pulls over you in the night. "That rainy night you happened to find me." "No coincidence," he said. "No apology, only regret. We tracked your routines to keep you safe. When you broke the pattern and walked through a dangerous area, the protocol triggered. We saw you collapse from a panic attack, a suspicious man following. We intervened. It was the scenario your mother and I had hoped we'd never reach. So, everything between us was built on lies. On a foundation of protection that required strategic silences, he amended the corner of his mouth, bitter. But the feelings, the pull, the thread growing between us, none of that was staged. I studied him, drawing on every instinct honed by reading people in the library's quiet. In him was exhaustion from secrecy and relief at finally speaking plainly. Marco Woyne said, another piece clicking, his sister. Costa threatened him to make him cooperate. But you knew long ago. Marco came to me the moment they approached. Damien said, "We moved his sister to safety the next day." His betrayal was theater. feeding false information back to Costa, mapping the network, including Megan. She really believed she was protecting her family by giving them social details. She didn't know she was being used to harvest data on you, he said evenly without venom. Part of me wanted to feel relief. Instead, I saw the chessboard clearly set up all this time in a room where I had no key. What now, I asked, surprised at my own calm. Now you know everything, and you choose. Damien replied, accept the protection, with the whole truth of why it began, or refuse and face Costa as they move to open attack. That isn't a choice. It's accept help or die. Sometimes the world offers only survival. He said words like pins. But survival is still a choice. And that's what your mother wanted you to have. The right to choose. I looked around the place that had carried me through so much shelves I knew by Dewey number the reference desks that had been allies in countless nights. I love this place. And suddenly understood love has its limits. If I choose you, I said slowly, what does that mean for us? It means we see what exists between us when it's no longer shielded by emergency or lies for safety. He smiled, and the smile was more dangerous than any shadow. We see if it can survive the whole truth of us. The offer was both alluring and frightening. To accept him was to step into a world where violence was one decision away, where power moved without stamps or seals, where love itself could be turned into a weapon. To refuse meant walking unarmored into a hunt. What does Costa want from me now? Direct access to my operations, security protocols, personal vulnerabilities. If they can't get it, they'll use your existence as leverage to make me cede ground. His voice darkened. And when they see you have no value left for their mind games, you become surplus stock to liquidate. I should have panicked. Instead, my mind felt clear as a lake after rain. If they saw me as expendable ammunition, their mistake was to think expendable meant powerless. I choose you, I said, my voice so steady it startled me. I choose the dangerous life because it's the only real choice, and I choose to fight. In Damien's eyes flickered surprise, then relief, then pride. Fighting means doing things that contradict the way you've always seen yourself, he said. Then we'll find out who I am when all the familiar layers are stripped. As I answered, feeling a strange force lift my voice. And I'd rather discover that with you than die certain and alone. We rose together. As we left the rare books room, I understood the quiet life of independent habits I'd clung to had been an illusion someone kept from collapsing. But maybe illusion is also how a heart learns to breathe before stepping into the thin air of truth. And now, with truth here, I wasn't afraid. I opened the door and stepped through. The abandoned warehouse in New Haven's industrial quarter looked like the end of the world, ringed with rusted containers and streetlights long dead, leaving pools of darkness perfect for violence to hide. 3 weeks of meticulous preparation had led to this night, the Costa family's last gamble, pouring all their desperation into forcing a reckoning. Here, not only my fate hung in the balance, but the fragile scales of power between the city's hidden forces. I sat on the cold concrete floor, bound to a metal chair by zip ties that bit raw into my wrists. On the ground, dark stains told stories I didn't dare imagine. Above a fluorescent light flickered a failing heartbeat in its last shudder. Vincent Costa circled me, moving like a predator, long accustomed to blood. His expensive suit looked absurd amid rust and dust. Older than I had expected, 60s silver hair eyes that had made life and death decisions his whole life without a moment's pause. Miss Jensen, his voice was calm, boardroom civil. Do not think this is personal. You are simply the most effective weakness with which to force Damien Rowe's hand. 50 feet away I saw Megan and another girl, younger Marco's sister. They too were bound, frightened, but unharmed. More hostages meant more complications for any rescue. What do I want? Vincent glanced at his gleaming watch. Rowe must withdraw from the port contract, abandon the Southside distribution network, and hand over the protection ring around the museum district. And in return, I asked, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. In return, your life and theirs. He nodded toward the girls. The warehouse doors banged open metal, echoing loud, and Damien stepped inside, Marco and 8 men at his back. They moved as one unit, sliding into place around containers and machinery, their crossfire angles locking like puzzle pieces. Vincent Damien called, his voice carrying through the cavernous dark, deep, steady, but edged like a blade. We settle this as men who understand negotiation. Civilized men don't point guns at innocents, Vincent countered, crouching behind my chair, using me as a shield. Civilized men don't threaten families to force betrayal. Damien returned. Weak light fell across his face, sharpening him into something dangerous and resolute. The air pulled taut, ready to snap. Outside, the city went on, trucks rumbling, the highway trains screaming through the yards. But here the world contracted to a single choice. Vincent sneered, "I have 3 hostages and home ground. You have many guns, but you cannot shoot without risking your civilians." He tallied everything, guns numbers, positions. But he forgot one variable, the mental state of the hostages. For 3 weeks, Damien had drilled me, slow breathing, anchoring, counting beats to stay steady. What had been weakness, my panic, was now a weapon. I inhaled, fixed every detail. Vincent's stance, the guards' hiding places, the rhythm of the faltering light. "Megan," I whispered, pulling Vincent's focus back to me. "Remember those breathing exercises before exams? In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Her eyes flickered with recognition. She began slow, deliberate. I turned to Marco's sister. "Follow her." The girl trembled but obeyed, breath evening out. The air shifted. We were no longer 3 trembling women, but 3 steady minds. Vincent narrowed his eyes. Clever. But deep breaths won't stop bullets. "No," I said, "but they let you choose the right moment. When the tide turns." As if summoned, the power roared, then died. The warehouse fell into darkness, the emergency lights bleeding red across steel. In that chaos, everything erupted. Megan toppled her chair, rolling into shadow. Marco's sister moved with surprising precision, already working her bonds. Vincent gripped my shoulder, but I was already moving. The ceramic blade hidden in my coat lining sliced clean through plastic. Freedom. My hands shook, but they were sure. At that instant, Marco's team swept forward like phantoms, dropping guards with surgical silence. Damien advanced, a moving streak of light in the red glow. "Let her go," he commanded, soft as a whisper yet absolute. "She is my insurance," Vincent hissed, his hold slipping. "Your insurance just became your burden." I twisted away muscles, remembering every drill of the last 3 weeks. Space opened between us. Enough. Damien raised his gun. One short, clean shot. Half a century of Vincent Costa's empire ended on cold concrete. As the red light steadied, Damien knelt beside me, hands examining the raw marks on my wrists. They trembled slightly, though his face remained calm. "Are you badly hurt?" "I'm afraid," I admitted, "but I'm still alive." And in the truth of it, I felt something new. Fear still lived inside me. But now, alongside it, strength. Megan came forward, eyes wide, body intact. "Clara, I'm sorry. For everything. For spying, betraying, dragging you into danger. Forgiveness can wait," I told her. Not cruel, but firm. Now we leave before the police or feds descend. Marco's sister was already clearing evidence, her swift, precise movements proof this was not her first time cleaning a scene. I glanced around the warehouse, air thick with gun smoke and metal, then back at Damien. In his eyes was pride and fear. And in that moment, I understood we had crossed a chasm together tonight, and there was no path back. Megan stood frozen, her eyes caught between awe and terror, as though only at the very end had she begun to grasp the world her family's desperation had pulled her into. "So now, what happens?" she asked while Damien's men gathered us from the warehouse. "Now the Costa operation in New Haven is finished." Damien answered calm, as if reading a report. "That territory will be divided among organizations who can manage without kidnapping civilians to settle disputes. And us." Megan's gaze flicked to me. Damien's eyes did too. There was pride in them, relief, and a quiet waiting. "That depends on what Clara chooses to do with the self she discovered in hardship," he said. The car slipped out of the industrial quarter through midnight streets. I realized the librarian who once collapsed in the rain, undone by panic, had died somewhere between the moment I accepted Damien's protection and the moment I cut myself free from Vincent's chair. The woman who remained was one I was still learning to name, but strong enough to build a life worth fighting for. Tonight's test wasn't measured in bullets. It was in refusing to let fear devour reason when others needed me steady. "Where are we going?" I asked as city lights fractured into starlight across the car windows. Home, Damien said, and for the first time since this storm began, the word sounded like a destination. Not a point on a map, but a place to decide who we would become and what we might build together. 14 months later, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling glass of a converted warehouse overlooking New Haven's harbor, watching the tide of morning rush beneath me. My daughter pressed softly inside me, small kicks like greetings in a language still being learned. Before my eyes stretched all that mattered, the library where my old life ended, the docks where new strength was forged, the water of the Long Island Sound horizon opening into the possibilities I was still learning to row toward. My transformation over the past year had been more radical than I ever imagined. On that first morning, I woke in Damien's house. Afraid lost, not knowing that safety could evolve into something deeper than survival, meaning. The woman reflected in the glass no longer resembled the librarian who crumpled in the rain. Yet, books still anchored me. Only now they carried me further than a circulation desk. Mrs. Rowe, a respectful voice behind me. The morning press brief is ready. I turned. James, our assistant, offered a tablet with updates for the cultural educational programs I now directed in the Growing Row ecosystem. What began as an attempt at legitimacy had changed color, becoming something real, community investment, practical, and human. How is the literacy program, I asked, settling at the desk that looked out on two worlds at once, the harbor's horizon and the private library that filled half the top floor? Exceeding projections, Ma'am James said with formal brightness. The Fair Haven Centers report a 30% rise in reading comprehension. The vocational tracks see 85% job placement. Numbers, yes, but they were also full dinners, children staying in school, families lifting their heads a little higher from despair. And the museum partnership. The Rowe Foundation is sponsoring the Journeys of Immigration exhibition at the New Haven Museum. The mayor's office calls it a model of public-private cooperation for the community. I smiled. Political capital could carry projects further, but what warmed me most were the evening classes in East Shore, where mothers learned to read alongside their children. Damien appeared in the doorway, quiet but warm. Marriage had softened some of his sharper edges and doubled the protective instinct that had once unsettled and drawn me at the same time. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, his footsteps practiced to avoid startling me, though this place was now fortress enough. "Good morning, husband." The words still new on my tongue, heavy with meanings I was still uncovering. How was the port meeting? Smooth. The new contract brings 40% more legal cargo ships, which means jobs in the neighborhoods that need renewal. His tone was brisk, but I heard the quiet satisfaction behind it. One arrow striking many targets. Since Vincent had been taken off the board, the pace of the Rowe transformation had quickened, not erasing the past, but evolving it, keeping the core trimming the reckless edges. "Marco's sister wants to expand the youth mentorship program," I said, glancing at my notes. "If we add after-school classes, we could double participation." "Approved. Whatever's needed, fund it." Damien nodded. His trust in me wasn't flattery. It was commitment building pathways for children who would otherwise face roads that narrowed too soon. Dr. Martinez called about the anxiety research grant, I continued. Early trials on sustained calm under pressure are promising. The breathing and anchoring methods I learned have been adapted for firefighters, paramedics, nurses. Anyone who must stay steady to save lives. Once I thought panic was my chain, now I knew it could be a key. A soft knock at the door. Megan entered her professionalism, now replacing the old tremor of guilt. A scholarship had given her honest work, and our friendship time to heal. "The quarterly report is ready." She placed the file, her hand steady. Legal revenue up 18%. Charitable spending on target. "How is your mother?" I asked the question now, restored to its natural shape. "Wonderful," Megan smiled. "Physiotherapy brought nearly full recovery. She just signed up to volunteer at the senior center we fund." I looked at the three of them in the sunlit room, James with his charts, Megan with her ledgers, Damien with his steady promise, and saw a strange structure, survival as the foundation, truth as the frame, trust as the roof. Each tile laid one by one. I placed my hand on my belly, welcoming a small kick like a Morse signal. "Mother, I hear you." Beyond the glass, the water struck the shore. Cranes turned slowly like the hands of a city learning to love its people better. And I understood, home is not just where you are safe. It is where you dare to be, good dare to be, true dare to become. Trust between Megan and me did not return in a night, nor with one apology. It was rebuilt slowly, through each small project of the education fund, each financial report, each working session where we stood on the same side for something larger than ourselves. I learned that betrayal born of family desperation is not the same as betrayal born of greed or malice. And Megan learned that friendship with me now carried boundaries and responsibility, a silent pact etched into the rhythm of this new life. Remind her that the fund's health insurance covers preventative care too, not just emergencies, I told James. The first initiative I'd ever proposed was comprehensive health care for employees and their families, born of the memory of medical bills that once broke mine. When Megan left, Damien and I withdrew to our corner of the office, a reading room paneled in oak shelves stretching to the ceiling, filled with rare editions, alongside books on psychology education and community growth. It was our refuge inside the whirlwind of work, a small library at the heart of the empire we were building. "Do you regret it?" Damien asked, settling into the leather chair beside me, his hand resting gently on my belly, where our daughter stirred more present with each nearing day. "Regret what? Accepting your protection, joining your family, turning panic into research, or marrying a man whose enemies sometimes have to be permanently dealt with." I half joked, half confessed, the weight of all we had walked through woven into the question. "All of it," he said honestly, with such tenderness, my heart softened. "I know. This was never the life you dreamed of before you collapsed in the rain. That life," I leaned into him, "was built on illusions of safety and independence, illusions that never truly existed." I felt our daughter's faint kick, as if she recognized her father's voice. "But this life is built on truth. Truth about the cost of protection and what love demands. And I can live with that cost because I chose it consciously, not because it was forced on me. I had seen what happened to those who refused protection in a world where violence was always ready at hand. The memory of Vincent Costa's warehouse could still touch me with its cold blade, but it no longer made me a victim. I had become someone who knew how to breathe, to turn to survive. "Dr. Martinez says our daughter might inherit your anxious tendencies," I murmured. "She will never lack protection. And more than that, she'll have parents who teach her that strength comes from facing things, not running from them." Damien replied firm, as always. Evening fell gold spilling over the city, and I stood once more before the glass wall. The library district where my old life had ended now looked different. Not like a limit, but a beginning. "Dinner's ready." Damien called, his voice carrying warmth of family, rather than command of a man who once led soldiers. "I'm coming," I smiled, laying a hand on my belly, feeling a kick in reply. I thought of the journey from the trembling girl in the rain to a woman who chose to take this man's hand into the dark, and made that darkness into a home. The reflection in the glass wore a maternity dress sewn to measure jewelry, marking my place in the city's intricate hierarchy. But beneath the elegance was still a heart that loved books, that loved knowledge. I was no longer the librarian who collapsed in the storm, but I was still me, only larger. "I'm not who I used to be," I whispered, not sure for whom. "Neither am I," Damien said, wrapping his arms around me from behind, his touch so gentle it erased the memory of the violence he'd once had to choose. "Some transformations are worth every price." We stepped into the dining room, where Marco and his sister waited. These dinners had become sacred ritual, family time untouchable. I understood now that accepting Damien's protection had taught me the difference between safety and secrecy, between surviving and living, between independence and isolation. The choices I made had reached further than my own happiness. They rippled outward into the community, into legacy. Our daughter kicked again, stronger this time, as if answering her parents' contentment, or as a promise that her future would be built on truth, not illusion. She would grow up knowing what her family did and why. Sheltered, yes, but also taught that love is the real strength. Beyond the glass, the city lit up like a million dreams racing. In my heart, one dream had taken form, a family, a legacy, a new definition of power. Power that lifts instead of hoards. And I understood some journeys begin with a collapse in the rain, only to lead us into transformations that make every fall worthwhile. On a late autumn morning, the city still slumbered beneath a veil of mist. I sat by the window with a cup of tea, steam curling upward like a gentle whisper, and my baby shifted within me, a reminder that I was no longer alone. Outside, the streets stirred awake, car horns, footsteps, the familiar fragments of a city that never truly paused. Yet inside me, stillness spread like a quiet miracle. There was a time when I believed myself to be fragile, a girl who would crumble beneath the weight of her fears. Then came that night of rain, washing away the boundary between who I had been and who I was becoming, pulling me into a world I had never imagined. In that world, love arrived like an umbrella held wide, sheltering and testing in equal measure, forcing me to learn how to stand even when the wind rose. Damien came up behind me, his arms circling mine. No grand promises, no gilded vows, only the simple absolute truth of his presence. We had walked through darkness and storm, and what remained now was peace. The quiet certainty of two people who knew they belonged to one another. I understood then rain no longer carried fear alone. It scattered seeds for beginnings, and when the sunlight broke through the cracks within me, did not vanish. Instead, they glimmered like fractured glass, catching the light in brighter, more dazzling ways. If this journey has taught me anything, it is this: sometimes collapse is not the end. It is life making space for a new version of ourselves, stronger, gentler, and braver in love.